Hey, what's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back with another client interview for you guys today. Today, I'm really excited to have David on with us because David is one of our students who just absolutely crushed the recruiting process. He's just finished going through the summer 2026 process very successfully. I'll let him tell you about it himself. Was able to get multiple offers. Would have probably gotten more, but he turned down some remaining super days and super hardworking guy, deserves all the success. And I just want to get him to come on here and talk to you guys about kind of his journey, how he was able to do what he did, what were some of the obstacles he had to overcome along the way. And then hopefully, what we talk about will shed some insight that you can apply to your own process as well and hopefully help you along the way. So, with that said, David, thank you so much for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. And first of all, congratulations. But if you want to introduce yourself real quick to our audience, just in terms of who you are, what's your background, and things like that, and then we'll dive into some questions for you.
Sure thing. Yeah. So David Mockbee, I'm a sophomore at Indiana University, studying finance and international business with minors in German and music. And I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, and I'll be heading to Lazard for my 2026 summer
Awesome.
internship.
That's awesome, man. So obviously we know we were talking before this, and obviously Lazard was your top choice, so you just accepted it on the spot. Aside from Lazard, I know you also got some other offers and turned down a couple other super days. Like, what were some of these other firms that you were kind of in the process with?
Yeah, yeah. So I was fortunate enough to receive an offer from JPMorgan to join their TMT team out in San Francisco. And also had a super day with Moelis LA that I had to turn down, and then was being contacted by Centerview for a super day that would have, unfortunately, my offer for Lazard would have expired by the time that that super day took place, so turned that
No.
down as well. And
Yeah.
was waiting to hear back from Bank of America. Heard some positive rumblings there, but obviously, really, really happy with the choice I made.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, I think you said you accepted on spot, but I was gonna ask like, what what did that feel like when you first got the offer?
Yeah, it was super cool. I think, we might get into this later, but I'll just say it now. I had a bit of an atypical process for Lazard. I got in touch with some people that were able to move the needle for me pretty early on. And basically got plugged in. As I said, I go to Indiana, not by any means a target school. I think a lot of people call us the pen of non-targets. So we'll go with that for the analogy.
I
But
never
still
heard that
non-target.
before, but that's funny.
Yeah, still a non-target nonetheless. And basically got plugged into their target school recruiting process and got invited to their sophomore kind of talent development program, diversity program type thing, a couple days before my super day. And they treated that program as my first round. And then was able to kind of source a lot of really cool material, meet some really cool people a couple days before the super day, which was super, super helpful going into the interview process. So all that being said, it felt fantastic. I don't think I've ever put more work into something for a longer period of time ever in my life. So super, super satisfying. And it was also great. Lazard, as many other firms do, has the most senior person that does your interview call you. So it felt really cool to get the call from the MD. I thought we had gotten along really, really well, and
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
that's awesome, man. Who were the first people you told?
Um, Told my parents first, and then we'll also get into this later, I'm sure. But here at IU, we have a pretty interesting process for those that want to go onto Wall Street. So,
Yeah,
told one of my mentors in our workshop class here, and then call my professor as well, who kind of leads the workshop. And then a whole host of other techs came in, and had to thank some other people that have really helped me along the way.
that's awesome, man. What did your parents say? How did they react? Were they like expecting this? Or like, oh, we knew you were gonna get it. I guess you had already had an offer before that, so it wasn't
Yeah,
like this was the
so
first offer.
when you asked me to introduce myself, I spared you all the rehearsed tell me about yourself answer. But in my interview, team A, I always, explain my background, which is I'm from a family of college professors. So my mom is a ballet professor and my dad is a
Wow,
poli-sci professor.
wow,
So the line that I use in my tell me about yourself is between the two of them, it's pretty far from the world of high finance.
yeah,
And that's the truth. So, when I started this process, they didn't really understand what it was. But credit to my mom and my dad, they've kept up with all the terminology, all the bank names, all the firm names. And they knew that Lazard was my top choice. And I was able to, tell them, and they were keeping up with everything. Obviously, I think one of the beauties of the model of the bulges is the brand recognition. So when I got the JPM offer, obviously they knew what JPMorgan Chase was. We have
Yeah.
banking accounts with them. That's where my IRA is. So they knew what that was, but had to educate them a little bit on Lazard after the program on that Wednesday. And
Yeah.
once I did, I think it was really, really clear to all of us that that was going to be my top choice.
Yeah. They're like, son, are you sure you want to take this over JP Morgan? Like, what's Lazard? Like,
Yeah,
some kind of
yeah,
animal or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, because yeah, you're right. Like the bulge bracket banks like the Goldman and Morgan Stanleys and JP Morgans of the world obviously are household names, and you don't really have to work in finance to recognize those. But
Yep,
obviously all the elite boutiques like Centerview and Moelis and Lazard, like these firms that you were talking to, you kind of have to be working in the industry to really know like a lot of times these are just as good, if not even better opportunities, right? So that's awesome though. Man, so just to be clear on what you were saying though, like so you're saying you said you got plugged into the target school process, so meaning through your networking, you were able to, because I think what you're referring to is most firms typically will have their target school interviews first,
yep,
and then they'll interview like non-target schools. Whatever spots are left, they'll interview like the non-target schools. Which, so you probably weren't supposed to interview this early,
yep.
except the guy kind of pulled you up. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah, so for Lazard especially, it was super, super crucial. They run extraordinarily late nowadays. Obviously, a couple years ago, this would have been right smack them in the middle of everything. But with timelines being pushed forward, they actually don't run their typical recruiting until like second week of March. So I would not have had even a first round interview until next week at the very earliest.
Mm,
Next week is going to be their final women's program. And then at that point, they'll open it up. From my understanding, there's only going to be about 4 or 5 spots left for that entire process in the New York office, which is just crazy to think about.
for the
So,
non-targets.
for non-targets, yeah, exactly. For that traditional, we call it like here on campus, we call it like general recruiting.
Yeah,
So for all the general spots, it's going to be in the single digits as far as availability goes, and hundreds of applicants. So it was super, super crucial for me, and I think that goes to the point, like, networking is the number one thing at a lot of these firms. Even those firms like JPM that say that they're networking blind, like I know for a fact the only reason I got a super day at that JPM office was because I did a networking call and was fortunate
right.
enough, lucky enough to hop on the phone with somebody that was helping out with the recruiting process. So
Yeah.
I think that's paramount.
Yeah, for sure. So then the rest of the IU kids, then, if they have an interview with Lazard, they're going through the non-target process next week then, and
Yeah,
going. Okay.
unless they're in the women's program, which we do have a couple.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough regardless, but okay. Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is like, that is the advantage of going to a target school, right? And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, yes, IU is like probably as good as it gets for a non-target because you guys have the IB workshop, you have the PE workshop, you have all these things that most other schools don't have. But even then, still from just like interview logistics standpoint, because you're not going first, a lot of times like there's a lot fewer spots left by the time you're even going up for your at
Yep.
bat, right? So that's amazing that you were able to pull it up. So I guess before we dive more into that, because I'm sure people are wondering like, oh, how did you do that, and like, what was your networking process like? Let's go back to the beginning. So, because you joined, you started working with us. I think it was like July after freshman year, and so prior to that summer, I guess during your entire first year at Indiana, are you one of the Indiana kids who went to Indiana because you knew you wanted to do banking? Because I know there are a lot of those. Or when did you decide or realize that, banking was what you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, it's a good question and it's kind of multifaceted answer. So yes, to your point, there are probably half of the kids that come to IU that end up doing banking knew that they wanted to do banking at the start, which is
Mm,
crazy to me. I don't know how on earth anyone at 17 or 18 years old in high school wants to do investment banking.
yeah.
Um, but there are a lot of those. But for me, I came to Kelly, and that's our business school, Kelly. I came to Kelly just because of scholarship opportunity. I actually thought I was going to go into music school, believe it or not, follow my mom's footsteps, go into the fine arts. Thankfully, for my future bank account, did not do that. But definitely, Kelly is one of the few places that I think gets a lot of, it's like a happy medium is the way that I always try and think about it. You
Yeah.
get the benefits of a state school. You can, I mean, like I said, I have two minors in music and German, two completely unrelated things, and then themselves unrelated to business. So you get that optionality, you get the holistic education, and you also can, tap into an amazing business school, a top 10 business school,
Yeah.
probably a top five alumni network. And it's, truly like a match made in heaven for me.
Yeah.
But no, I came to Kelly largely because of the generosity of the school, as far as my financial situation, and then it was like I said, just a perfect match.
Gotcha. So then you got to the business school and then you saw all these, classmates around you are all trying to do this thing called investment banking. And that's when you decided to look into like, what is this thing? Is that kind of how it went down?
Yeah,
I'm
so
taking a wild guess.
sure, it's a little different than that, but for the most part, yes. So I
Yeah.
came in thinking that I actually entered as an economic consulting major,
Mm,
which is one of the benefits of Kelly. We got a million majors. So entered as econ consulting, and then very very quickly realized that was going to be pretty limiting. So switched to finance and kept my international business. We call it a co-major. It's kind of like in between a major and a minor. So always had that interest in something else, but knew that finance was going to give me kind of like the Swiss Army knife degree, increase my optionality, not going to self-select out of anything. Switched that about halfway through my first semester. And from there, kind of started learning that Kelly, as many other business schools are, Ross, Wharton, Stern, McCombs, they're all driven by the clubs and by the student organizations,
yeah.
which I think is a misconception that a lot of students have. I know coming from a public high school that was large, it was always the professors and coaches that drove things. But at least at a large business school, it's going to be the clubs. So I kind of missed out, if I'm being honest. The first couple of weeks of your freshman year, people here at Kelly always complain it kind of determines your path. Um, and so I didn't join any of the finance clubs. I didn't join any of the banking clubs. I didn't join any of the PE clubs, any investing clubs. What I joined was a consulting organization, joined 180 Degrees Consulting,
Mm,
international, student organization, and I
yep.
joined our student government. And, those two organizations, while not related to finance, have a ton of people in them. Our student government at any given time has upwards of 150 people in it, and people are rotating in and out all the time. And more often than not, the people that are leading the organization are also leaders in other clubs. So for
Mm,
me, Kelly Student Government, KSG, was the entire reason why investment banking was even presented to me as an option. My second semester of my freshman year, we had a change in leadership after one of our juniors went abroad, the second semester of his junior year. And a kid, a grade above me, who's actually abroad right now, funnily enough, took over his role as kind of like the vice president of finance for our student government, manages our money. It's now the role that I have now that he's abroad.
mm,
But he's going to Moelis, and he was a part of our investment banking workshop here on campus and basically got in my ear and was like, look, like you're a smart kid, you're well spoken. I think you do really well in this workshop. He didn't even think about what I would do in the industry. He just said, I think you get along well with the kids that we have in our workshop, which is our version of an investment banking club.
yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool, I'll see about it. And here at Kelly, we swear by Rosenbaum and Pearl. Um, I think one of the two went to IU. I think Rosenbaum went to IU.
Oh, I didn't
Um,
know that.
yeah, and one of them's at Perella, so kind of like a IU pipeline type thing. So we swear by that textbook. So my friend Mitchell got me on the Amazon link. He said, buy this. So okay. So I bought Rosenbaum and Pearls, read through the first couple chapters, and I was like, this is like another language, but you know what? I came here because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, so we'll just keep doing it. And,
Yeah.
again, credit to Kelly's infrastructure. They basically set it up so we had a self-study module over the summer, after our freshman year, and they opened it up at end of April, so right before classes kind of ended. And I kind of started looking through stuff, and I realized very quickly, I was like, man, I'm gonna need more help than just this. And that's kind of what brought me to Wall Street Mastermind was, realizing that I kind of needed a translator, if that makes sense. It
Mm,
really is it's like a whole new set of jargon and of terminologies and stuff like that.
yeah.
And I was pretty confident in my like reading comprehension skills. It was like, I know I'm reading this right, but it's just not quite clicking. Um,
Yeah.
and I think one of the things that was hugely beneficial, for me was kind of having like, I always thought of it as myself as like parallel processes. Like I had my IU process and my Wall Street Mastermind process, and combined, I was like, okay, this has to work. Like one of the two is going to get me to the finish line, if not both.
Mm,
Um, and at the risk of going on a tangent here, like I'll kind of move into like my process, getting us up to present day.
Yeah.
Um, Once I got back on campus, they had us sit for an entrance exam into kind of like a capital markets investment banking class.
This
Uh,
is like fall semester, sophomore year now we're
Correct.
talking. Yeah.
Yep. So we're moving through the summer. I spent the summer studying. And actually, you're right. That reminds me. I skipped over something that I think super important. When I started Wall Street Mastermind, I blew through the first like 5 modules. Like I was just so into it. I sat down for like 10 days straight and got through the first 4 or 5 modules, and loved it. And I was like, okay, this is fantastic. What do I need to do? I feel like I'm already behind. That kind of like that fire was kind of lit,
Yeah.
and managed to get a search fund internship, which I'll talk about later. That was monumental for me. And also, most importantly, I think, learn how to send a freaking email. Um, I can't stress enough how important that is. A lot of people overlook it, but email etiquette, how to keep track of your networking, that is like the most important thing.
Yep.
So instead of, just buckling down and learning all the math, learning all the finance terminology, I did some of that. But what I did was I spent my summer networking. So
Mm.
on my networking tracker, the earliest date is like July 30 or something like that. Like I was sending out networking emails really, really early on, and basically got the chance to talk to upwards of 40 different bankers, before I
Mm.
even got to campus, which I
Mm.
think was a huge asset for me, because I kind of got to learn from them. So anyway, all that being said, got to campus, passed the entrance exam by the skin of my teeth. That's not a lie. I was literally like 2 percentage points above the cutoff, and got into the class. And the way that we structured here on campus is it's designed to mimic investment banking recruiting. So what we do is we go to that class twice a week. They make us wear suits. They keep us till god awful hours in the evening, and
Wow. I didn't know that.
yeah. So and then it runs for 8 weeks. But during those 8 weeks of that class, you also have to conduct networking chats with the upperclassmen.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a perfect representation of what you'll actually end up doing, and what I ended up doing, when you're actually recruiting for a job. So managed to navigate that process here on campus in Bloomington pretty successfully. Was actually able to receive, admittance offers into both the investment banking workshop and the private equity workshop.
Mm.
So for anyone watching, like there's a decent chance that you've heard of the investment banking workshop here at IU. It's
Yeah.
relatively well known. Um, but the private equity workshop is new. It's only been around for 2 years. I'm the third class that's been a part of it. It's basically designed as a sister workshop to the IBW, and just kind of uses, Kelly's alumni network. Obviously, as things go, majority of our alums now are on the buy side. Obviously, as the industry goes, two and out, is pretty common. So at least half of our alums are on the buy side. And we realized a couple of years ago, hey, we're not tapping into this resource. Like this is a wealth of knowledge. These alums aren't even getting kids reaching out to them. Like think about all the referral opportunities that you could get. Think about all the educational opportunities. And the latter point is really what sold me. The whole reason I wanted to do this industry in the first place was the optionality and the education. So I chose the workshop that I felt would give me a greater educational impact.
Mm.
And that's kind of, my thought process. For further clarity, to really mimic the investment banking recruiting process, you have to sit for anywhere from 5 to 8 interviews to get into the workshops. So it's pretty robust. But
Yeah.
all that being said, got into the workshops at the beginning of November and really kicked things off right away. Went to Chicago with the workshop, went to New York with the workshop, got to visit firms, got to conduct in-person chats, which is huge, and really just set you up for success. We meet twice weekly again for class. I actually have it today at 6.
Yeah.
So really just an amazing opportunity, and super guiding force, right? Like, you asked at the beginning, like one piece of advice. I'll say something different when you ask me that question, but one thing that comes to mind now is leverage the upperclassmen. I mean, my gosh, they've been through it. They're a wealth of knowledge themselves. And, as I said at the beginning of this tangent, like the clubs run everything, and those people are going to be in the leadership positions of those clubs. If it weren't for the
Mm.
upperclassmen here, I would not be in this position.
Yeah.
And really just it all came together. And now here we are.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, you're right. Like, I think IBW is pretty famous even outside of IU. It's funny. So I worked at Square. It's now called Block, but I worked at Block for a year and a half, and then my first boss at Block went to IU, and I think he
Okay.
was in the second IBW class ever. So he was like, yeah, he's like, because he's I think a year older than me, I want to say. So he probably graduated like '07, '06, somewhere around there, which is like roughly when IBW started, and then yeah, so we've talked about like kind of how it was back then. Obviously, IBW's come like a very long ways to
Yep.
like being this brand new thing to now it's like a kind of like I would say probably the most famous investment banking club in the country, I want to say, even compared to some of the target schools. And then this PE workshop that you're talking about is very new. I think I heard about it for the first time from you actually.
Yeah.
So that's how new it is. But are you saying then like just out of my own curiosity, you're saying you apply for both at the same time and you can actually be accepted into both and then you just pick the one that you want to accept if you have that luxury, or you can only be
Yes.
accepted into one or the other?
So this is a touchy subject. If any IU kid ever views this video, I apologize in advance because things are going to change.
Okay.
But the way that it worked for my process for my year was given the nuance of the PEW, they kind of just lumped the recruiting processes together. They didn't have the infrastructure in place to separate the recruiting processes from one another. So all that was separate was the interviews. So for the IBW, I had 3 interviews, and for the PEW, I had 5. So that's why I said 8. Um, One thing that made it unique was that they kind of both focused on different aspects. So the IBW was very, very traditional, like super day at a bulge type interview. So, one behavioral, one markets, one technical. That's pretty much how it was. For the PW, it was very drawn out. It was over an entire week and a half. We had 2 alumni interviews. We had like a passion pitch, which sounds really weird, but honestly is a really great measure of someone's behavioral characteristics and their ability to talk. And then we also had a technical and a case study round. So, pretty robust differences in the 2 interview processes, but they both ran at the same time. It was a hectic 2 weeks. And the way it worked this year was that yes, you could in theory be offered admittance into both workshops, but then you can only join one.
Mm,
But the way that it's constructed now, and as I said, it's going to change. Both workshops kind of sit under an umbrella organization that we call the IBN, the Investment Banking Network. So on campus, we have more than just the 2 workshops. We have the investment banking workshop, the private equity workshop, which is what I'm in, the investment banking seminar, the capital markets and banking workshop, and then the investment management workshop.
mm,
So altogether, those 5 organizations make up the IBN. And that's kind of what, all of our alumni fit into. They're all accessible. We have a huge Excel file with everyone in there. There's like 1,800 people, soon to be more, obviously. And, that's kind of how we categorize things.
yeah.
So to answer your question, yes, in theory, you could be admitted into both, but moving forward, we're going to see how that goes.
Gotcha. So what are we talking about? Like because my understanding is you first have to take that class, right? Then a lot of people, either don't pass the class or I think you have to get at least like a B plus or something if I remember correctly.
It's,
To
yeah,
even
yeah, the threshold changes every year. You just have to beat the average.
Yeah, and then I know a lot of people end up dropping the class because maybe it's too hard, whatever. But like overall, I think I've asked our other IU students before, but it's like, what's the acceptance rate on these? It's like hundreds of people that apply each year or are interested each year, and then like I forgot how many people they take. Like it's pretty selective, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the numbers are a bit skewed because all the figures are based on total applicants and not actually total people that sat for the entrance exam. But as far as I can tell, there are around 700 kids, and get this, 700 kids out of a freshman class that is 2,000. So just wrap your head around that. That is an
Wow.
insane proportion.
Yeah.
So 700 kids signed up to take the entrance exam. Um, we only took 200 into my section of the class that feeds into the IBW, IBS, or PEW, and then another like 80 into the CMBW, Capital Markets Workshop. So that's more the sales and trading side, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So combined, you want to say anywhere from 250 to 300 kids get in.
To
But then for
one to
the
one of the to one of the five workshops or whatever you're saying.
correct, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then from there, they make a cut at the interview level. So you have to write a written application, and that's a pretty menial cut. It's like 20% cut. So then from there, anywhere from 100 to 160 kids, let's say, get an interview. And then the IBW's class for my year is around 60 kids. And then the PEW class is 19. And then the investment banking seminar is around 35.
Mm.
So altogether, what is that? Roughly 120, 130 kids get in?
It's like, yeah, 115, 114.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot.
But the beauty
Yeah,
is that we've had like a 97, 98 placement rate out of that group of 120 for the past several years. I mean,
yeah.
it is truly special what we've been able to build here. And that's not to say that we're all going to Goldman, JPM, Moelis, Perella. It- we have placements at Stout, we have placement at BGL, we have placements at Mizuho. Like it's all across the spectrum, which at first glance, anyone watching this might seem like, okay, well, that kind of discounts the whole thing. But if anything, I think it makes it stronger because you're helping kids find the right spots for them. And you're also just expanding the reach, right? Like we always talk about, part of your consideration for which offer you take should at some level be for the good of the program. Like that's kind of you have like we call it like happy, humble, kind. That's like our motto for the workshop. So, you know, you should be doing it to pay it forward. And I
Mhm.
think that definitely helps kind of erase some of the stigma around the industry as being greedy or whatnot. So we definitely do kind of push that idea of like a culture of care or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you guys definitely have a good thing going there. I think it's amazing what this professor has built. Even going back to what I heard from my friend who was in like one of the original classes. So that's honestly awesome. So it looks like, I mean, not to get too far into the weeds because I'm sure a lot of people don't go to IU and they're like, okay, I don't care about this stuff. But like, I think this is applicable to everyone, regardless of what school you go to, in the sense that I think IBW maybe is the most prominent example, but to be honest, nowadays at most schools, certainly all target schools, but even a lot of the semi-target and even some non-target schools like IU, there's almost always going to be at least one, if not more than one, kind of like IB related
Yeah.
theater club on your campus, right?
Yep.
And that's just like what the landscape is nowadays. And so, and a lot of the times to be successful in recruiting, I mean, I'm not going to say like, if you don't get into something like an IBW equivalent on your campus, then you can't get into banking because that's
Sure.
not true. Like we've worked
No,
with a lot of IU students that come to us because they couldn't get into IBW,
exactly.
right? And so there are other ways to get in, but like no matter what, like we also have students like you and a couple others in the program that did get into IBW, or even like came to us with the intention of wanting help to get into something like IBW because all these clubs if you can get in, you always should because it's only going to help. It's never going to hurt. It allows you to tap into like an additional alumni network, some
Yep.
stronger than others, but like, always better than nothing. And, so a lot of them will give you training on interview prep and networking and resume and all these things, similar to like kind of what we do in Wall Street Mastermind. But they structure their recruiting process, like you said, just like how investment banks recruit. And I always say, like, uh, I'm not gonna say it's as hard as it is to get into like a Lazard or a Moelis because it's not, right? But the analogy I always use is like if trying to get into these top tier investment banks is like trying to make the varsity team, trying to get into an IBW or IBW equivalent for whatever your school is kind of like trying to make the JV team, right? Like it's
Yep.
like you got to make the JV team first, and then if you do well in JV team, you make it to the varsity team. Um,
Yep.
and so the beauty of it is like, and I think some people make the mistake of thinking about this as like an either or thing, or they're like, well, let me wait and see if I can get into IBW first, and then like or whatever the equivalent is, and if I can't, then maybe I'll use something like Wall Street Mastermind. Or you could think about it like it's so hard to even make the JV team. Let me
That
put
was
my
my,
yeah,
yeah, that
let
was
me
my
put my
thought
best foot
process.
forward, right, and do everything I can to get in.
Yeah.
And then if I do get in, because like here at Wall Street Mastermind, like we didn't build this program with like these clubs in mind. We're not like, oh, let's build a program to help kids get into clubs. Like we built this program to help you make the varsity team. And so everything we teach you is like that's where the bar is for like
Yeah.
how well we have to prepare you guys. And if we can prepare you enough,
And why, yeah, you should get into the club. Exactly. Of
then you should get into the club,
Yeah,
right? Because it's not going to be as hard as the actual thing, even though it
course.
is still hard. And so I think, it really just depends on how you want to think about it. And then even after you get into the clubs, right? Like to your point, some people are getting into like Lazard and JPMorgan and potentially would have been Moelis and Centerview, just like you, right? And then some people are getting into like Stow and BGL and these other places that you mentioned earlier, which like the outcome is not binary, right? Like when I was like, people are like, oh, if I get into IBW, then they have a 98% success rate, so I'll be set. Like, yeah, you
Yeah.
probably are set, but like also not all offers are created equal. Like if you could get into a Lazard, you would rather get into a Lazard than like a smaller bank, right? Because let's just be completely honest about it. Like you're gonna be working on bigger deals, more deal flow. You're gonna get paid more. You're gonna have better exit opportunities. There's a lot of benefits, like no doubt about it, right? And so everyone should be thinking about their career, about like the outcome in their career trajectory along like a spectrum. It's not like, did I get in? Did I not? It's like, what is the best offer I could have possibly gotten? And just given how competitive it is to break into these top tier firms, like I have never met a single person who says, "Oh yeah, I had too much help." Like I wish I had a little less help and I would have been just fine. Like, like in hindsight, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm glad I had all the help I could possibly have, whatever that means to you." And I was able to put my best foot forward. And I know I did my best and I left nothing up to chance, right? Like this was the best outcome I could have gotten. And as long as you can say that, then there's no regrets whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think like the way you thought about it was really, really smart in terms of like, I mean, obviously you did try like reading Rosenbaum and whatever on your own, but like when you realized it wasn't really clicking, you like just kind of like set your ego aside. It's like, all right, I'm gonna go out and get some help, right? And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, right? Like this is your career, super important, right? And
Yeah.
if you had not gotten into IBW, like you passed by 2% on the entrance exam or whatever you said, like if you had just gotten a slightly lower score and you didn't get into IBW or you didn't get in PEW, who knows what would have happened? But like maybe you still would have gotten in banking, but like it would have been very different, right? It would have
Yeah.
been way more difficult.
Yeah. It definitely would have. And like I have thought so many times like, oh, what if I had changed something? Maybe something would have changed differently or gone differently, and I wouldn't change anything. I think that's like kind of the mindset you have to have at the end of it. Like all of the decisions that you make at the beginning should be made within the framework of saying, okay, at the end, when I've signed my offer, I don't want to feel like I should have done something else. And obviously that's impossible. Like we all have regrets, but you should try your best to fit everything into that mold. And I don't think I would have gotten into the IBW or the PEW without this program, without, learning. And it's not something like tangible. Like people have asked me, like, oh, well, what did the IBW give me, or what did the PEW give you that like pushed you over the edge? Or like what did, in this case, what did Wall Street Mastermind give you that pushed you over the edge? And I always say it's like it's not like you can't point to one thing. eh, the answer I try to give, if they are looking for just one thing, it would just be the broad concept of learning how to, number one, lean into your strengths, and number two, supplement your weaknesses, which I know sounds corny, but it's honestly the truth. Like, for more context, I'm still not great at the technical side. Like the technical portion of my interviews was always like the most stressful for me, even if it was just basic conceptual, like walking through a DCF. Like all of
Yeah.
that was always a trigger point for me, especially the mental math. I mean, you saw I couldn't add up to 115. Um, but I've always been a people person. I've always loved talking to people. I've always figured that I can find some portion or some node of commonality with anyone I meet. And so what I did is I thought to myself, okay, how do I maximize that at the same time that I'm supplementing this technical side?
Yeah.
And I think that's where Wall Street Mastermind shines. Like I said, it tells you how to write an email, how to manage your time, how to, track who you're talking to, who to target. At the same time, you learn how to link the three statements. Like it's a perfect blend. And I've always been a good writer, but I wasn't conforming to the email format that's kind of accepted into this industry. Like I look back at some of the emails I sent in freshman year, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But when I was going through the IBW and PEW process, I did the most chats of anyone in my grade. So I did 34 chats, and the closest number I've heard is 31. So like even by a marginal difference, I still did the most chats of anyone. Because I wasn't doing well in the class. I was middle of the pack in the class.
Yeah.
For context, like we take quizzes every day, we have multiple exams, you have to build models. I was good at the modeling side, but I wasn't good at, just taking an exam on finance concepts. Um, and by the end of it, I got okay, but um, I was like, okay, this isn't going well. Time's running out. Where can I shift my efforts that are going to make the difference, move the needle for me? And I was like, it's the chats. Like, if I can get straight 5 ratings, because the upperclassmen have to grade you. If I can get
Mhm.
straight fives on all these chats, there's no way they can not let me in.
Yeah.
And my thesis was right. I mean, I don't know if that's, a blanket approval for everyone in these clubs, but I honestly think, if you can find what you're good at and figure out how to make that the best, and then also at the same time kind of raise your weaknesses to an appropriate level, then I think that's the recipe for success. And to your point earlier about, yeah, this conversation's pretty IU centric, and of course I'll sing IU's praises till the day I die, but going to that program at Lazard on Wednesday, I got to meet a lot of people from a lot of different schools. I got to meet people from anywhere from, McCombs down to University of Connecticut, all the way up to Harvard and Wharton, right? So like I got to meet everybody across the spectrum. There were about 50 kids at my program, and you know, they all had different takes on, their own schools, frameworks for recruiting, what they did. And what I noticed, and obviously these anecdotes are not supposed to be taken as a mass generalization, but the target school kids didn't really know one another. They didn't really have that same sense of camaraderie as like, everybody pulls each other up, you pay it forward, happy, humble, kind, all that. Like it just wasn't there. And, the focus was more so on I go to X Ivy League school, me. I am this person. Whereas for me, it's like, oh yeah, I'm in the workshop. I'm not like I'm not me. I'm like a member of this workshop that has been proven that, I've learned so much from here. Let me present all the things that I've learned and that I can bring to your firm.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of a difference in the mindsets. So if you're someone watching this from like a non-target school, I think lean into that, if anything.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, you have to be realistic with yourself, take off the rose-colored glasses and say, all right, yeah, I'm not going to get the initial, checkbox clicked on my resume of seeing Harvard or UPenn or Yale or Michigan or anything like that. Like, if you go to Ohio State, like I'm from Ohio, so I can rip on Ohio State. If I see Ohio State in your resume, there better be something else, below that that's going to make me want to keep reading. Um,
Yeah.
and so I
Yeah.
think, you got to figure out what that is.
Yeah, for sure. That's really great advice. Yeah, I think obviously we work with a lot of target school and non-target school students in Wall Street Mastermind, and I think students that we work with tell us different things, like with target school students, like if you go to a Wharton, everyone around you is also trying to get into investment banking. But to your point, like it's very cutthroat, and I think people kind of um, more so view each other as like their competition,
Mhm.
and so they kind of keep their cards kind of pretty close to their chest, and they're not like trying to help each other out or whatever, right? And I get it because every bank that comes on campus to recruit, there's a fixed quota in terms of like how many people they'll hire from your school, and so it's like if you take one of the jobs, that's one fewer job for me, right? I think the beauty of something like an IBW or PEW, and we even see it in Wall Street Mastermind as well, is like when you have this type of community where the success rate is really high, people don't have that scarcity mindset. So it's like you don't have to feel like as cutthroat with the other IBW members because you guys know that like most of you are going to get jobs. The vast majority of you are going to get jobs anyway. It's a matter of like, again, not everyone's going to get the same type of offer, but like, you're going to get a job, right? So you can be a lot more, like that camaraderie is a lot easier to
Yeah.
build in my opinion, right?
I
Um,
think that's just like the reason I brought that up is not to, harp on IU, but it's just to say those clubs are the rest are like that's the key to unlocking that asset of the camaraderie and like tapping into your peers, tapping into your on-campus network. Like if there's any semblance of that at anyone's university or college, like that is the place to be because you're surrounding yourself with people that have either one gone through the process already or two are going to help you get there.
yeah. Um, I do have a couple other questions related to this. So, like, because obviously I know you, want to join Wall Street Mastermind, sounds like with the intention of like helping you with the process of getting into the clubs. Was that like, and you mentioned before, like your parents, they're professors, they know nothing about finance, they know nothing about the recruiting process. I'm sure you had to talk to them about, this idea of joining something like Wall Street Mastermind when you're first considering it. And I feel like a lot of parents in that situation, especially if they know nothing about, the investment banking recruiting process or how competitive it is, this is like a very foreign concept to them, right? Or they might just say like, oh, well, we're already paying for you to go to IU. Why don't you just like try to see if you can leverage the resources on campus first? And if you can't, then like, maybe we'll consider something like this. Like, how did you have that conversation or how did that go? And was that like a challenging conversation in terms of like convincing your parents and getting their support or
Yeah, I mean,
that like?
it's It's definitely yeah, it was definitely a process. Took about a week for them to come around to it. But the way that I described it to them that I think was positive was that in my situation, going to a school with such a robust network, I described it to them as an insurance policy. And it was like, yes, these organizations on campus are fantastic, but they're student run, they're student selected. So if you piss off the wrong senior or, you go to a party and do the wrong thing in front of somebody, like that can be the difference. And I was like, I don't particularly love that about IU, but it's just the way that it is. So I explained to them, I was like, look, this is going to be kind of my safety net. This is going to be the thing that basically raises my all-around candidacy to a pretty darn good level. And, either way, how things go in the first 8 weeks on campus, this is still going to keep the door open for me. And, them being professors, I was like, think about any student that comes to you as a doctoral candidate, right? They're both, full tenured professors, so the PhDs, they take on graduate students. And I
Yeah.
was like, think about those grad students that come to you guys and just think about the impact that you can have on their academic professional careers. You understand the power of a good mentor. And I was like, why on earth would we not try and maximize the amount of, mentors, or in this case, coaches that I would have access to? Like that, those are the people that always pull you up. And, it goes back to my decision to join the PEW versus the IBW. PEW, we have one professor that leads the entire thing. And, he kind of describes our process is you got to find your champions. That's what he calls them, coaches,
Yeah.
mentors, champions, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
It's the people that are going to pull you up, move mountains for you, like the VP at Lazard that moved my super day up, put me into the target school. Like those are the type of people you have to find. And I think that Wall Street Mastermind was just, one of a set of champions or mentors or coaches that I was fortunate enough to have. And that's kind of how I framed it to them. Obviously I laid the groundwork, explained what investment banking was, explained the recruiting process first, but once they understood that, had to sell them on the value add, which I think is tremendous.
Mm, gotcha. That's really good the way you went about it. Cause like you kind of, um, you broke it. Obviously, you have to do a lot of educating around how the process works and
Sure.
give proper context. But I think the thing that you did was really smart is like explain it in a way that they can relate to and understand because they're professors and they also mentor a lot of people.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that is, that's really smart. Because, dude, honestly, I asked that because a lot of times, like, we have students in a similar situation as you, and they really want to do the program, and then they go and talk to their parents about it, and then they aren't able to convince them. Sometimes it comes down to like your communication skills and how you pitch certain things to them, right? Like if you know
Yeah.
something's valuable, that's fine, but you have to be able to transfer that conviction that you have over to your parents or whoever it is that you're trying to convince, right? So that's really, really helpful. The other question I wanted to ask you, which I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about too, is so you came into Wall Street Mastermind, like you've been in it since July. It's now February, which is like when you kind of wrap the recruiting. So that means that, for the last what is it, 6, 7, 8 months or whatever it's been. Um, you've been for the majority of the time you've been in both Wall Street Mastermind. I guess you were in Wall Street Mastermind first, and then you were also in PEW. Sounds like starting in the fall semester. What are what would you say are like the similarities and differences in terms of like what you got from each one? Obviously, I know you said like they're pretty complementary, but can you just kind of walk people through that a little bit?
Sure. And this might be rather long-winded as I kind of wind my way through, but we'll try and keep me on track here. So the PW, we'll just use the term IBN here on campus to describe the entire infrastructure.
Yeah.
So the IBN 100% unequivocally prepares you better than anything I've seen on the technical side. Between the course, between, peer studies, between student taught courses, between our professors, I don't think there's a better education system, period, in the country for investment banking technically.
Hmm.
We've built like 6 models at this point. I'd challenge any other college to show me a kid that's built 6 fully functioning models for, I mean, we're building one right now. I have a stock pitch tonight, or a company,
Yeah.
take private pitch tonight.
Nice.
Um, so that side was taken care of here on campus. The other side here on campus is definitely like the pipeline type considerations, like where to target. Um, it's pretty clear to those that are in the industry or those that are above, already signed, and have, worked at a bank, IU has a pretty strong presence at a couple of firms in particular, and then a decent presence everywhere else. Moelis, Perella, Bank of America, Goldman, like we have a ton of people there. And it's always helpful to know at the very least you can reach out to those people for advice. And then obviously, going through the on-campus process, the upperclassmen decide who they want to present out of my class to those people, right? So we have IU pipeline processes similar to Harvard, UPenn, Wharton, um, you know, any of those target schools have. So eventually those banks will come onto campus and conduct their interviews here in some scenarios. Or at the very least, you'll get sent on a separate interview with your IU people.
Yeah.
So as far as the tracking and the technical side, IBN process here in campus, that was the biggest difference, I think. Because Wall Street Mastermind, there's not really that same pipeline establishment. There's not really that same, um, you know, technical side. Obviously, like with the interview questions for the technicals, I actually think this was more helpful than the stuff I did here in campus because it's, more digestible, broken down into a true interview format.
Yeah.
But I think Wall Street Mastermind, what it really helped me with, and this is going to sound silly, was the intel. Just like the staying on top of all the logisticals.
Mm.
I didn't miss a single application. I applied to every single bank that I wanted to apply to within 8 hours of the application opening, which I think is huge. I think that's one of the most important things people don't talk about is just being on top of your timelines.
Mm.
It helped me so much with the management, with the framework in which I thought about things, and especially on the networking side. Like I said, I would not have been able to conduct 34 chats here on campus if I didn't know how to write a damn good email and keep track of my time.
Yeah.
So I think the soft skills, like the things that are in the background that people overlook, coincidentally, those end up being the things that separate the great candidates, the good candidates from the great candidates, or even the bad from the good. Like
Yeah.
I now can look at a freshman, and this is insane. We already have freshmen coming to us for help, which is ridiculous. But I can look at a freshman and pretty much tell you, yeah, they're gonna be good or no. Like just based on how they how they text, how they email, how they talk to me. Like I think gaining that level of like sensitivity to those soft skills, to those mannerisms, to those best practices, that is what this program is so, so good at. And I certainly would not be in the position that I am without it because, you know, as you know, this process is way too intense, way too rigorous, way too time intensive to get by based on your prior time management skills, unless you're, some genius. But
Yeah.
for 99% of us, you need the framework, you need the help, you need the mentality shift. And I think that's the biggest value add. Like I'll share this anecdote. Let's see if I can pull it up here. I have my iPad at my desk right next to my laptop. Anytime I'm doing networking calls, I will have my notes from the module 4, the networking module, up during every single networking chat I've ever had. It has just been right here.
Mm.
And at this point, I have it memorized, but it's just kind of like a comfort thing at this point. But at the beginning, it was literally like I would follow that framework and I got so many compliments in my networking calls, so many, so much great feedback. And I think that is just in and of itself, that should be worthwhile.
Yeah.
But you take into account that aspect with everything else that I mentioned. I think it's really just a perfect storm. And then obviously having the technical side here on campus was huge, and that pipeline management on here was massive for me.
Gotcha. Um, when you said Wall Street Mastermind breaking down kind of the interview side of things, you're talking about the behavioral aspect, or you're talking about both the behavioral and technicals, or
Honestly, for me, the biggest help here was the technical breakdown. Because on
mm.
campus, we get a super granular view, like we're talking financial concepts, like financial theory, like
Yeah.
academic theory of risk and all that stuff, like way too into the weeds to even
Yeah.
kind of like pull back out and bring it to a high enough level for an interview.
Yeah.
Seeing you or any of the coaches break it down in a mock interview setting, I think it's module 3 is the technical interview. I'm blanking on the modules, but whichever
Yeah.
module that is, like that is pretty much how I answered the technicals. And it worked clearly, but I think that is definitely the framework that I use, and I think that anyone else should use too.
Mm. Gotcha. Okay. Um, one more thing that I really want to ask you on because you've really emphasized how important networking was for you, both in terms of getting you into the workshop, doing more networking chats than anybody else. You did 34. And then even at the very beginning, you mentioned networking was the thing that got you into the JPMorgan process, even though they say they don't do networking. It was the thing that got you pulled up for the Lazard process into the target school pool. So what what do you think is like, what was the key to your success when it comes to networking? Because everybody knows, or anyone who's serious about investment making knows that you're supposed to do this thing called networking. Like everyone knows vaguely, yeah, I should network, right? But like the the way people go about doing networking, there's such a huge variance in my experience in terms of how people approach it and how good they actually are at it. So if you could distill it down to just like maybe one or two of the most important things, because obviously we could sit here and talk for like 10 hours about all the things you could do well in networking or whatever, like what are all the best practices. We have an entire module on that, but like, what do you think is like the most critical or most impactful thing if people could just like take one thing away?
It 100% is being genuine and not coming in with a goal.
Mm,
Um, I never hopped on a single networking call with the goal of getting a referral or the goal of getting plugged into a certain process. It was always just trying to learn and trying to meet someone. Like I always heard it described to me like you basically want to end up at the end of the 30-minute call, you want to end up having a friend. And I was like, okay, that seems a little cheesy, but the more that I did them, I realized, yeah, that's honestly kind of true. And obviously, like the framework is, the conversation starters. Everyone kind of looks over that as kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like I'll just make small talk. For me,
yeah,
that was the most important part of a phone call. I could tell within 30 seconds how a phone call was going to go.
right.
Um, and I think being able to, if you want to take it back and be concise, like what can I do to make that a possibility? Have a freaking standout, tell me about yourself. I have seen so many people that here on campus at least, they complain, oh, my life's so boring. Oh, I'm so basic. Like, my dad was in finance, my mom's in accounting, and this is just what I want to do because that's what my family does. It's like everyone has something that makes them unique. Like you have to figure out what that is. For me, that was music and German. Like
Yeah.
who in this industry plays an instrument? For me, it was pretty easy, but for a lot of people, it's a lot harder. But once you find that and you figure out a way to fit into that first 30 seconds of a phone call, fit into your introduction, open the doors, right? Like that's the analogy I like to use. Like open the doors and let them walk through. You can open if you can open, five, six, seven doors and you're telling me about yourself in that first 30 seconds, you're going to have a 30-minute phone call that doesn't once touch finance. And I think
Mm,
those are the best phone calls. So, if you want to think about it as a saying, open the doors and you tell me about yourself. That's my biggest piece of advice for interviews, for networking calls, for anything is just figure out how to get people to ask the right questions. Figure out how to guide them.
yeah. You're saying when you say open five, six, seven different doors, you're saying because there's so many, you're almost leaving them like breadcrumbs as
Yeah.
you're going through, you're telling me about yourself, and then they can decide whatever they find to be interesting, they can ask you more about that.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Yep. Like
Yeah.
I have, I'll open the music door if the person I've only had that hit like 10 times. Like I said, it's rare in this industry, but those 10 calls have been fantastic. Like I'll say, "Oh, so I'm a music minor." Okay, well then that doesn't work. Then I have the German side. All right, somebody speaks German. Cool. I had a conversation in German. It's a pretty wild phone call, but it was fun. Um, you know, I play golf. I play lacrosse. I go to IU. That's usually the big one. And I started as consulting. Like you get my point.
Yeah.
Is just kind of like, you got to figure out, okay, where can I find the commonality? Because you got to think, these bankers are doing what, 10, 20 of these networking chats? Like, you don't want to be just like, oh yeah, I talked to that kid like 2 weeks ago. Like you want to be like, oh my gosh, yes, that was the golf kid, or that was the, Amherst kid that played soccer. Like, there's something that you want them to remember you by. And at the same time, you need to be able to present that in a professionalized way. Like
Yeah.
I did a mock interview with a Lazard analyst who I got along really well with. And he asked me at the end of our initial networking call, he's like, okay, did you do speech and debate or something? Like, what's your secret? Like, you talk so well. And I don't mean to say that as a braggadocious way. Like, this is just what he said. And I was like, no, like, this is just me. And he's like, holy shit, this is your genuine, this is how you talk. And I was like, yes, this is how like I talk to everyone. So I think if you can kind of figure out a way to balance everything about yourself and package it up into a digestible thing, that's
Yeah.
that's really like that's the way to go.
For sure. For sure. You definitely are very well spoken. I agree with that. So, so I concur there.
Thanks.
But no, like that, I think that's, you make some really, really good points. Like, for people who are listening, the point you made about being 100% genuine and not coming onto the call with like a very transactional mindset, which I feel like is what most people do. Um, you 100% need to approach it that way because of course these bankers know why you're reaching out to them to have this call in the first place. Yes, like you want a job. Yes, you want to interview. They get that, but um, they don't know you,
Yeah.
and before you can get them to help you, they have to first like you as a person. If they don't like you as a person, they really have no reason to help you because there's nothing in it really for them, right? And so the best way to get someone to like you, I would say, is two things. One is being an interesting person, which is kind of like what you're talking about, and opening up different
Mhm.
doors that they can walk through. I like that analogy. But then the second thing is the other way around too, which is like you
Good.
being genuinely interested in them,
Yep.
right? And like just wanting to learn more about their story and what they've done. And you talked about like having common interests. You could talk about that. Um, I was interviewing another client, a week or two ago who also crushed it with recruiting, and he's going to Evercore, same thing like you. He's like turned down multiple like 6 7 other super days basically, and they're like calling him to like ask him to renege and continue interviewing with them and stuff. And these are like top banks and top buy side firms. It was crazy. But he said something really similar about networking, which is like, and he had like a, I would say, pretty mid GPA. He started out pre-med. That hurt him in the beginning because he has no interest in medicine. And by the time he switched over, like his GPA is kind of, I would say, pretty average. Um, but he crushed it. And he said one of the things was like with networking, same thing. He would like hit it off with these analysts. Some of the Evercore analysts, like they would have like 90-minute calls with him. You don't ever have People don't have 90-minute calls for networking, like ever, right? But it's because the conversation going so well. And he was like, there's one thing that really stood out to him, um, which is he was talking to this girl. He gets on a call with her. Of course, you do your research beforehand, see like
Of
what you can
course.
find about them.
Absolutely.
And on their LinkedIn profile, it showed that, at one point, like I guess prior to her banking days, at one point she was training to try to become like an Olympian. Like, so I forgot what sport. So that's always like very interesting, very unique. If you're meeting anyone for the first time has that background, you would think you would definitely ask them about it. Like if this was a first date or something, you would probably ask about it, right? And so he just asked about it. He was like, "Yeah, you probably get this question all the time, but like, what was it like um, training to like try to make the Olympics?"
Yeah.
And then the girl paused and was like, "You know what? You're like the first person who's ever asked me that."
No.
Yeah, yeah. But that just goes to show, like, so many students are like reaching out and doing these networking calls, but they're just going through the motions, or they're
Yeah.
just like they come on these calls, they have like 10 canned questions that they prepared ahead of
Hmm.
time, like, what is it like in a day of what's it like to be an investment banking analyst? Like, why did you pick this firm? Or like, like stuff like
Yeah.
that they've answered like a million times, and it's very boring, it's not that interesting. And then there's like this thing sitting right there that's actually interesting, and you don't show any interest in it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how is the person on the other side supposed to feel about you? So,
Exactly. And I would say like sometimes you're not gonna be able to find that stuff, and like that's the beauty of taking the approach of not having a goal is like you get that organically. Like I can't tell you the number of times that I've been on these calls. I think I did around 80 network calls. I sent at least 300 emails, so around 80. Um, and out of like probably like 40 out of the 80, like half, it was always like something would come up that you could not find anywhere about this person, and you're like, oh my gosh, like no way, like tell me more about this. And, that would be the majority of the conversation. And like this popped into my head earlier, but the best thing about that is you don't have to ask them to help you. At the very end of those phone calls, they'd be like, okay, David, I've got a meeting in 2 minutes. I've got to run, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just shoot you over to, my buddy who works in, industrials or TMT or whatever. Or I'm going to shoot you over to the guy sitting right next to me. Like go reach out to him. And then, you do another one or two of those phone calls. And next thing you know, you're in HR and,
Yep.
you're where you need to be. And it's like, like if it happens organically, it's just that much better.
Yeah. That's why one question I get a lot when it comes to networking is like, how do you make the ask? Like, how do you ask for the referral? And I'm like, well, you don't.
Yeah,
Like,
you shouldn't.
yeah, if you do everything right, you want them to proactively offer it without you having to ask for it,
Yeah,
right? Um, Man, this is awesome. I could keep going for days, but I want to be cognizant of the time because we've been on here for a long time, and I know
sure.
you got stuff to do too, and you have a pitch later today, like you said. So look, guys, for those of you who are still with us and listening, like, hopefully a lot of this resonates with you. But like, if you're out of school where, you have these feeder clubs, they're super important. You should absolutely try to get into them if you can. Most of our students are in the feeder clubs at whatever school they're at, right? Either they joined before or they joined after, and we helped them get in. Regardless of what the situation is for you, um, you can never have too much help, and your outcome is not binary; it is along a spectrum. You should not be asking yourself like, "Oh, what is the bare minimum that I need to do to just get an offer?" What I would be asking for something as consequential as your career is, what is the maximum that I can do to get the best offer possible? Because this is something that's going to affect me, not just for like the first 1 or 2 years of my career. It's going to affect my exit opportunities. It's going to affect what I do for potentially the next several decades, right? Not trying to exaggerate, but like that just really is how it
Yeah,
is. And so, if you guys understand that and you want to put your best foot forward, um, I will highly encourage you guys to reach out to our team. You can do so by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The streets abbreviated to ST is wallstmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do is, you'll book a time to speak with us. We'll get on with you. We'll learn more about your situation, what it is that you're trying to do. What do you feel like you need help with? What kind of banks would you like to get into? What have you already done on your own up to this point? And what do you feel like is not working? You can tell us whatever you want. And based on what you tell us, we'll try to kind of help you map out like what we think we can do to potentially help you with those things. Or on the off chance that we don't feel like we can really help you or we're not the right people to help you, which does happen sometimes, then we'll just point you in another direction in terms of like, maybe you can do this, maybe you can look into this, whatever it may be. Like, really, like, we'll just try our best to help you out, whether that's with us or without us. Right. And so, if that's something that you guys are interested in, then again, go to the website, feel free to book a call, and we look forward to talking to you. All right. With that said, David, this was super enjoyable conversation. Like I said, I feel like I keep going. You're very easy to talk to. I can see why you did well in networking.
thank
Um,
you as well.
and just super happy for you, man. Like you deserve all the success that you got. Like you saying, I was gonna say this earlier, which I forgot to say, but it's funny that you said you came in the program and then within the first 10 days you blew through like the first 5 modules or whatever. Usually we can tell who's going to get a really, really good outcome based on how they show up in this program. Like there's a leading indicator because at this point we worked with over 1,700 students and you can kind of tell like some people come in and they just hit the ground running and they're like, going all out, right? And they have that sense of urgency and they're working their butt off. That's usually like there's an extremely high correlation there. And then there's sometimes there are people that do come in and unfortunately do the opposite and they don't do any of the work or they procrastinate and whatever. And then like those people are typically the ones that end up not getting any offers, right? So like I could have probably told you within the first 10 days if I had known that you were doing that you were well on your way. So anyway, all of that is to say, you worked extremely hard. You absolutely deserve all the success that you have, and really appreciative of you coming on here and just kind of sharing all your stories with everyone today. I think people got a lot out of this, and so huge congrats again. I'm excited to see what you do at Lazard this upcoming summer, and then also really beyond that. And if there's anything else we can help you with, don't be a stranger, man.
Absolutely. Will do, Sam. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really fun. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up here, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And until next time, all right, cheers.